Hi, I'm DJ from Videoverse, and as you can probably tell from looking at this table, I despise Final Fantasy. Which is exactly why I'm making my very own top 10 Final Fantasy games of all time. Now, of course, I have to preface this. This is my personal top 10 list. Some of these games that you probably like won't be on this list or won't be as high as you probably think they are, which for some of these games, I kind of agree with you on that. And some of these games, even on this table, won't be on this list. Like for me, this top 10 list is categorized by which game that I felt was the most fun, not really which game that I felt was objectively the best story, gameplay, character, and all that stuff wise. Just which game that I had the most fun playing personally. So with that out of the way, hope you guys enjoy this, and let's move on to number 10.
Ah yes, the game everyone loves to hate, Final Fantasy XIII. Honestly, I blindly was a part of that bandwagon until me and my buddy Cole fully played it on the show, link in the description below, and honestly, I actually enjoyed it. The battle theme Blinded by Light is my favorite battle theme in the entire franchise. Also, even to this day, the game looks great graphic-wise. Having a second female protagonist is pretty neat, and it's always satisfying to stagger an enemy in battle. I will admit that I did enjoy the hallways, and I hated that you had to read a bunch in order to fully get what's going on in the story, which to me isn't good storytelling. And as inspiring as the auto battle system is, especially at the start of the game, it is really nice though when you're just trying to grind for Crystarium or whatever. Also, the game has a really nice startup where shit just goes down right from the get-go, which helps to really hook you. I love it when games, movies, or anime just start off like it's supposed to be the climax of the story within the first few minutes. So after playing it through, this game to me isn't as bad as people say it is, but it definitely has its issues. Also, Baby Chocobo is the shit. Following the Nova Crystallis series, we have Final Fantasy Type 0, one of the more darker games in the franchise where you see chocobos bathed in blood screaming in an all-scale war with visible death and murder and stuff. I'll be honest, I bought this game for the Final Fantasy XV demo at the time, and while I did enjoy the demo, the game was also a lot of fun on its own. What puts this game above Final Fantasy XIII for me is simply the combat. I enjoy action-based games more than turn-based games on average, but this game also requires strategy and has a huge cast that all have a unique gameplay style. Granted, I only cared about Queen, 9, and Psyche? 6? I don't know. And being able to control summons was pretty dope too. I'll be honest, I didn't care too much about the missions of this game, and for me, the story felt a bit dragged at times, and I wasn't a fan of the final boss. But overall, it was a fun game that I enjoyed more than 13, and the soundtrack was dope. Now where's the sequel? This next game doesn't have the huge variety in playable characters like Type 0, but Final Fantasy V does have variety in its job class system. What puts this game higher for me than Type 0 is the job class system, and just how much more laid back of a Final Fantasy game this is. It does have serious moments, but it also knows how to goof around and doesn't take itself too seriously, unlike... And I love how as soon as you're able to play the game, you immediately start off riding a chocobo. Hell yeah. The job class system is a huge improvement from Final Fantasy III and has so much more depth and replayability. I would love if the next mainline Final Fantasy game had a job class system like this one. Like Pro Jared said in his review of this game, Final Fantasy V isn't underrated, it's overlooked, unlike this next game. The game to rival Skyrim in terms of re-releases, it's Final Fantasy X. PS2, PS3, PS4, PS Vita, and Switch. If this game isn't the launch title for PlayStation 5, we riot. For me, what puts this game above Final Fantasy V are the characters and the story. Wakka is awesome, brudda, and watching Tidus and Yuna's awkward romance grow was heartfelt. While this game does follow the same linear structure as 13, because despite the fact that this game came out first, it does it better in my opinion. The combat and the sphere grid system is fun, and the battle theme is also really good too. Of course, the voice acting apart from the main cast is kinda bad, but hey, it was the first mainline title to have voice acting. I hate how, even in all the re-releases of this game, you can't skip cutscenes. That's so stupid to me. Also, I'm not a fan of the true final boss of this game. That fight was a joke, especially after the fight before it. I don't know, maybe that was the whole point of the thing for the story, but a few other Final Fantasy games follow the formula of introducing the true final boss, like in the last few hours of the game, which I'm not a fan of. A lot of people say this was the last true good Final Fantasy game, and I gotta disagree. This was definitely a great game, but personally for me, some of the games after this one I enjoyed much more. Luckily for me, Kefka from Final Fantasy VI is a huge improvement from a lot of the villains of previous Final Fantasy games, and even a few others past this one. I love the sprite work of this game. Terra is a great character supported by an amazing diverse cast who sometimes feel more like the main character. This is probably one of the most emotional games in this series, but still can be goofy at times. Kefka gradually goes from this more goofy villain to this genuine world-ending threat, which is cool to see. The whole game is one emotional roller coaster. The use of summons in this game as your source of gaining magic spells is awesome, and I like how each character has their own unique abilities, making them stand out even in combat. Most people would put this game way higher on this list, and I don't blame them. Honestly, don't have many negatives, if at all, about this game. This game's story is awesome and it does a great job really fleshing out these characters, especially in the side quests. The only reason it isn't higher for me is because these next 5 games I simply just had a lot more fun playing. Sprinkled with biased nostalgia, of course. Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn is like a dream come true, not just for Final Fantasy fans, but for fans of the fantasy genre as a whole. It's a great MMORPG where you get to create your own character and live in a fantasy world along with many others and go on adventures just like you did from the perspective of the characters from other Final Fantasy games. I do enjoy MMORPGs, but I get bored of them pretty quickly. Final Fantasy XIV, though, I can play a bit longer and have a lot more fun playing. It's so beautiful and massive content-wise. Seeing all the little nods to other Final Fantasy games in the form of boss fights, weapons, or locations is also really cool too. Personally, I don't really care at all about the story because it's a lot of reading, but I have so much fun exploring the world of Eorzea. The only reason this game isn't higher is that it's a subscription-based game. Of course, it's completely understandable why it's like that. They're constantly adding, maintaining, and fixing things, which is great. I'm glad they're doing that. But all the other games on this list above and below provide a full experience for $10 to $60. No more charges past that. Also, Titan's First Phase theme is a fucking banger. Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced at number 4 is a perfect example of nostalgia for me. I knew about this game since elementary and have played it many times. Granted, I only beat it for the first time earlier this year. When it comes to tactical games, the grid-based system is my favorite. That's also why I love the Disgaea series. It feels a lot faster and more dynamic because you also have to worry about where you and your enemies are located within the map. I enjoyed the characters and it was a fun story about the dangers of escapism. This game also has a job class system like Final Fantasy V that is fun and easy to master with many jobs depending on your race, so it gives a lot of replayability. Now my only downside is the very beginning of the game with the snowball tutorial fight. While it's fun to make everyone gang up on mute, I really wish I could skip it. It's a shame that there hasn't been any more of these types of games, and I hope one day they make more. Until then, this is definitely a game I will play over and over again. The combat in Final Fantasy XII is 100% why I love this game so much. The job class system in the PS4 and Switch versions, where everyone can have at least 2 jobs, is great and adds a lot of replayability. I could have Vaughn be a katana-wielding time mage in one playthrough, and in the next a monk that knows white magic. It's so good, and the Gambit system gives you a huge toolbox of big boy brain plays to create your own automated strategy depending on the situation, which is so good. I did enjoy the characters, and I like the fan theory about whether Vaughn is truly the main character or not, because I can easily see it going both ways. But personally for me, I didn't care too much about the story in terms of the politics. My brain immediately turns off whenever I hear talks about politics in games, and it's especially worse in this game because that's a huge part of it, because I don't care too much. But it's still a great game. I love that this game in Final Fantasy Tactics Advanced has its own universe of the world of Ivalice, providing its own desert utopia with different races and its own group of summons, making it that much more distinct. Speaking of desert utopia, I feel like there isn't much variety in all the locations. There's just lots of sand and grass. While this game is third on my list, for me it comes second in terms of its gameplay. I love the combat of this game, thank God for the speed up function, and this game does get really hard sometimes. I think I died the most in this one. Pro tip, do not use your elixirs till the end of this game. They are as valuable and hard to come by like Phoenix Downs in Final Fantasy III. When it comes to pure nostalgia, Final Fantasy IV takes the cake for me at number 2. This was my first Final Fantasy game that got me into the series, and this is the only Final Fantasy game where I was super invested in the story and what was happening to these characters all the way through. Every time I get to the scene when Edward plays his harp, I always turn up the volume a little bit just to listen to it. Rydia is also a really cool character, and it's great to see her rise past her fears and become a dope summoner / black mage. And Golbez is one persistent motherfucker. Oh my god, I hate him. I will say, without spoiling too much, the game does kind of ruin its story a bit by playing it too safe, deciding to do something drastic only near the end of the game to change its mind. That was a bit of a letdown, and it does kind of ruin some of the emotional weight that the game establishes. Despite all those things though, I love Final Fantasy IV and will always be my go-to Final Fantasy game for the story and its characters. Out of all the Final Fantasy games I've played, Final Fantasy VII Remake is definitely my number 1 Final Fantasy game. For me, everything I've talked about that I liked from other games on this list, this game has all of that in one. I already liked the original Final Fantasy VII. The characters, the music, gameplay, and story were great. The remake takes that into overdrive with current gen graphics, with same good story with new additions, nice voice acting with a bit of anime cringe.
You owe me a pizza.
Action-based combat, which is my fave, and great music both new and old. When I learned that Survive Said the Prophet, the guys who did the opening for Vinland Saga, were gonna make music for this game, I was hyped. Speaking of combat, this was my favorite aspect of the game. To be honest, sometimes I couldn't care about the story just because I wanted to fight more enemies. The stagger system from Final Fantasy XIII is here and used well. How you use materia and some of your special moves with the ATB gate system is cool and requires strategy past hacking and slashing. I like how summons are used in this game, and I can play as Tifa, which already makes this game a 10 out of 10. I guess I didn't like how slow the story felt at times. Also, this is only the first part. They turned a 4-hour section from the original 30 to 40 hour game into its own 30 to 40 hour game, which is insane to think about. For me, the game was slow at times, but once it got to chapters 16 or 17, it was just non-stop boss battles all the way through, which is really cool, and for me, some of these later bosses were a real challenge. Hard, but fair. Ish. Overall, I felt like Final Fantasy VII Remake was an amazing experience, and I can only imagine how hardcore fans of the series who've grown up with this game must have felt when playing it, and I'm very excited for the eventual part 2.
Hope you guys like this video, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Gavin's top 10 Final Fantasy list, which is very different from mine, so it gives you a really interesting kind of look into like what we consider to be the best or the worst Final Fantasy games. So there's that. So I hope you guys enjoy this video, and see you next time or whatever. Bye.